Hello and welcome back to Minds of Mountain Film. I'm Aaron Huey and I'm here today in conversation with photographer Chris Rainier. Chris is here at Mountainfilm this year showing a film called Tattoo Odyssey, which documents the making of his book Ancient Marks. Chris, welcome back.
Thanks, feels great to be here.
Maybe the best place to start is to find out when you began photographing people with tattoos. Did you start in the US, in the streets of the US, or did you start right off the bat in the jungles of Indonesia?
Well, my whole life's mission has been about photographing indigenous cultures, cultures that are on the edge of transition. I was finishing up a 10-year project of photographing traditional practices and festivals and traditions in New Guinea. And I was coming out of New Guinea, where they do a lot of tattooing and scarification, arriving in Los Angeles and United States and Europe and seeing this absolute explosion of pop culture tattooing. And I thought, you know, for the next project, I really want to kind of pursue the flow of ink, so to speak. So I wanted to make a comparison between traditional cultures, which many of them use ink as a form of initiation, expression, or scarification, and what is really going on in the West. Why are we so fascinated with marking our body, tattooing it, scarring it? So I decided, let's pursue this. So it was really about an 8 to 10 year project of making the comparison between the two. Finished up the book, and there was one last place that I wanted to get to in Indonesia, a very isolated group of islands where they do beautiful tattooing. Hence, the film project sort of evolved out of that.
So this brings me to the question. I'm very interested in the meeting of these two ends of the spectrum. You've got the Western world and the Eastern world and how they view tattooing. There is a kind of taboo on tattoos, but that's only in the West, where maybe this comes out of Western Christianity and Christian history, where they look at tattooing as being something almost bringing out darkness, or and it's relegated even now in some people's minds to
fringe culture,
truckers, fringe culture,
sailors,
prisoners.
Exactly.
Where does this fear come from, and can you talk about the difference between how these two different groups of people, let's say an indigenous group in Indonesia, views tattoos, and how traditional American society might still see that marking?
Well, we've marked our bodies since, you know, the day we started marking the cave. It's usually a form of initiation, a form of empowerment, often a form of beauty. Most tribal cultures talk about that the unmarked body is an empty canvas for the story to be told. So the scarring, the tattooing, very much a part of the culture of any traditional society, is very woven into their spiritual belief and their evolution as a human within the tribe. Fast forward to 1700s, Captain Cook and his sailors arrive in Polynesia. Polynesia is one of the epicenters of traditional tattooing, always has been, and many of the sailors saw these incredibly handsome, beautiful people marking their bodies, and the Polynesian word for tattooing is tata. It's the sound of the traditional instrument tapping in the skin. Well, they got tata'd, bastardized the word, went back to England, and that's how tattooing got reintroduced into modern European culture, but within a fringe element, the sailors, the lower class. So we've marked our bodies all along. The only period of time in human Western culture was just sort of prior to that period of time. The church had outlawed it, made it illegal, and then it started coming back in, and for a very long period of time sitting on the fringe of society. And really somewhere around the late 1980s it started going very mainstream. I think as science has proven religion wrong or irrelevant, and people are looking for meaning. They're looking for spiritualism, they're looking for context in their life, they're looking for going through some sort of initiation process, sometimes painful, to really belong to a group. So there's a lot of appropriation going on in modern society of traditional tribal habits, and saying, you know, now I belong to a group, now I belong to a special pack of people, whether it's your gang down at the local, you know, mall, or you're a tribal gang member in East LA.
Right. Now the film brings out some differences in the kinds of marking. Some indigenous groups have very specific symbols and marks that are used in repetition over a body, and they've always been used for hundreds of years. In the West, a lot of people are moving to a kind of imagery that's more free flow, and kind of like they're trying to find something inside themselves to bring out to the outside of their body. Can you talk about the difference between the West bringing their insides out, and the East like anchoring themselves
Right.
in the culture and the tradition,
Exactly.
preserving it?
I would argue that it is not any difference. I think if one steps back and look at humans, the desire to belong, the desire to create some sort of system within their culture, that it allows them to connect with the spiritual world. In some tribal societies through Asia, they still mark themselves with the monkey, the Garuda, or the pig, or symbols, the elephant with the monks in Thailand. Appropriating symbols that connect them to the larger spiritual world. It may not be as organized or articulated in the West, but as I've done these hundreds of interviews with people from, kids in malls to the whole sort of scene coming out of the modern primitive movement in San Francisco, Burning Man, gangs in Auckland, New Zealand, or gangs in Berlin, there's an attempt to articulate the desire to belong to a tribe and belong to a group and go through some sort of process to belong. And it's often painful, cutting, often blood, or the scarification extraordinarily painful. So, we in the West may not be able to articulate it as well as tribal cultures, but it's the same story. It's the
Right.
same arc of human expression.
The reason why people in the West and the East get tattoos is often in parallel. People in the West will get protection tattoos as
Right.
well, and they'll incorporate their own symbology into that. I want to go back really quickly to French Polynesia and Captain Cook. I've seen the photograph of Cook's Bay, of a man emerging from the water. He
Yes.
has tattoos on his face, correct?
Yes.
I'm really interested in people's fear of tattooed faces. It's such an extreme statement to make, or maybe that's just from the West. We see it as an extreme statement, and how many people have you photographed with tattooed faces? It's the kind of thing that makes people cringe sometimes, but in those
Absolutely.
cultures, it makes the body a beautiful place for the soul to live, and
Absolutely.
it's powerful, and there's certainly no negative connotations of having a tattooed face.
No, and in Polynesia, in New Zealand, certain parts of Africa, that mocha, that spiritual mask that one takes on, is sort of like your talisman, your symbol, your icon of your tribe, your family, your grouping. Again, here in the West, we fear the unknown. We certainly had that leftover residue of Harley-Davidson gangs, sailors, people that are on the fringe of society. But even as it's become very mainstream, a lot of the tattooing is still a desire to be on the fringe, a desire to make a statement that I don't belong to this system. Here is my way of telling you that I belong to a different group. So even as we've gone mainstream with it, and you just need to go to the beach in LA County or on a summer's day walking around Telluride to see, most people have one form of tattoo or a desire to kind of get a tattoo. So it has gone mainstream, but it's still a statement about wanting to not conform to normal society, which is really where we are. I think we're at a crossroads of human evolution where religion, many of the traditional systems that our parents and our grandparents grew up with, are really no longer relevant. So we're looking for some new meanings. And I think in a tribal society, it is also a way to be established, but it's also a way to prove your femininity or your manhood.
Mm-hmm. When I think about new versions of tribal society in the West and not wanting to conform, my mind goes straight to Burning Man. And you've made great photographs of Burning Man. And one of my favorite moments in the film is when you're all looking through a book together deep in the jungle of Indonesia, and you're sharing your photographs of tattoos of other culture, and people are seeing those photographs from Burning Man and of people from around the world tattooed, and it's inspiring them, maybe even in their own tattoos, and they're seeing parallels between themselves and other people. But that was quite a meeting of Burning Man meets
Yes.
interior of Indonesia.
Another tribal culture.
Right.
Well, I always say as the more I look for differences around the world, I think we all travel to see exotic things, to experience things beyond our realm, the more I've come to the conclusion that we're all very similar. So that moment was an exchange between two moments in human history. They made their choices, they are living where they are. It's a very different mindset than we in the West, but there was a moment where they stepped in and looked over the edge and looked into our culture. It was an insight for me to see what they were attracted to, and ironically, it was Burning Man. It was the most, not so much outrageous, but the most bold statements that people make about themselves. You know, the shot that got them going was two gay guys,
two men holding
naked in front of this kind of post-apocalyptic
and they say,
ark.
"Oh, are they cold?"
Yes. And it was wonderful. It was this sweet little moment. You know, they didn't care that two guys were hugging. They were just like, what are they doing? You know, what are they doing out in the middle of the desert holding each other? So I thought that was a very sweet, revealing moment.
I love that part of the film. And what that film also brought me to is thinking about how we as photographers break down barriers to become closer to people, to get them to reveal moments of their lives to us. And that's one step that you took, but other steps were entering a village slowly, not photographing right away. Can you talk about that? How do you enter sensitive areas and become trusted?
Well, my life is photographing indigenous cultures. As a National Geographic Society fellow, the mandate that I have coming out of National Geographic is to document the remaining cultures, but also to empower them to tell their own stories. And for me, it's all about time. It's people ask, you know, what's the thing that you're always looking for? And it's time. To me, the ability to slow down until there's a level of trust. I always say the quality of the portrait is in direct proportion to the quality of the relationship. If I wanted to do a portrait of you, I know you, but I'd want to spend 24 hours just hanging out with you, and then I think the intimacy of that portrait will be a lot better after that experience. So coming into a traditional culture where they're moving on a very different pacing, it's my responsibility to really slow down and hum in there and gain their trust. And you know, I always think about the classic scene of sitting on my back deck in my house, and all of a sudden, you know, a bus pulls up with a group of, doesn't have to be Japanese, it could be, you know, from any culture, Russian tourists, and they all come tumbling out with their cameras and they kind of jump on my back deck and start photographing me. I want to treat people the way I want to be treated, and it's just, they're humans. They're not an objective photograph that I'm taking, but there's a relationship there.
Yeah, and you can tell who you become close with, and there are characters come out in the movie, the shaman in the movie. I'm very interested in the role of shamans in tattooing. Again, instead of being counter to the spiritual traditions as it was in Christianity, it was absolutely embodied in spirituality, and so the shaman was the one who made the marks upon the body.
Yes. And to this day, there was a gathering of the Tahitian government put together the gathering of all of the tattoo artists from all over Polynesia, from as far away as Easter Island and Solomons, Hawaii, New Zealand. And in their culture, in the Polynesian culture, it was the shaman, it was the spiritual leader of the community that had the responsibility of tattooing. And so even today in contemporary Polynesian culture, with all of the assimilation of, you know, the products of the 21st century, there's still a very sacred role for that person who does the mocha, does the tata within a community and within a culture.
Now, in your travels, have you gotten a tattoo yourself?
It's so funny because I haven't yet, and there's a particular person in Polynesia that I've said I really want him to do the tattooing. And for me, what I have learned from the project is that this is your canvas. This is your story. And, you know, art is not static. It grows and it evolves. So I want to kind of create a tattoo that I can add on to, and it becomes the storybook of my life as I grow older and my son grows up, and, you know, all the different passages that we go through in life. I want that story to be there. Polynesians are aghast at the West and the way we tattoo, because we kind of plotch it on and just add it on here and there. They look at the whole entire body as a piece of art, and the art that you place on it, the tattoo you place on it, reveals about that person. So it should be looked at from many different angles.
And a lot of cultures will lay out an entire story on a body, a narrative. my wife, right before she moved to live with me in Kabul, Afghanistan, got a protection tattoo on her back. And she forgets she has it sometimes. It's a series of 4 lines of text down the center of her back that are a protection tattoo that make her bulletproof.
And we really talk about that in the movie, where it's like this can be a cloak of protection. This refocuses you on a daily level to be more responsible, for your actions, for preserving life around you. So it's a fascinating theme, and it's not, you know, the only project I work on. I'm constantly looking for projects that, on a visual level, being a visual storyteller, becomes a way of, the arc of the story for me is always about, you know, indigenous cultures living on the edge in this amazing moment in human evolution at the beginning of the 21st century. It's like these cultures will not be here forever. And so my mission for life really is to try and put that on film, but also use photography as a social tool to help preserve these cultures. I hope one day that, you know, whether it's a Metawai or a tribal person in Afghanistan or someone in South Africa in a tribe can look at the images that I've taken and their community has taken and say, well, we can do these traditional dances again. I mean, that's the power of Edward Curtis's images, is that Native American communities are looking at those images and going, we can do the sun dance again.
Right.
That's my grandfather there. There's no reason why we can't do those dances again.
Right.
Photography has that power.
Right. So now we're beyond tattoos, and that's perfect, because the film starts out talking a little bit about your evolution as a photographer. It talks about your war photography, and then most of the film is about tattooing. But what's next for you as you continue to document indigenous populations and around the world? I'm
working on 2 books now, 2 kind of books that are also film projects. One on the concept of sacredness. You know, what is sacred to a Tuareg in the middle of the Sahara Desert? I just came back from the Sahara Desert 4 days ago, working on this project of going to the tribal elders and say, take me to the most sacred place that you know. And it's very interesting to see what different cultures consider sacred. Their spiritual place, where they go to commune with their God. And essentially, I've created a group of people that give me the assignment of photographing their sacred place. So it's a series of images of cultures around the world defining what they call sacred, which is, I'm learning so much about the way people perceive the world around them. The other project is on sacred dancing masks, dancing rituals all over the world. The origins of Halloween. Where did we come up with that pagan ritual? And many traditional cultures around the world still do those sacred dances to keep them in connection with the forest.
Excellent. Dance, masks, that marking of the body.
Sort of an arc, yeah, so to speak.
Absolutely. Well, what then, let's kind of close it out then with what do you think is next in the evolution of tattooing then? Did you see anything where you saw this is a direction that's moving that is surprising me, that I think this is where it's headed? I mean,
well, a lot of people said to me, oh, you got to get this book out, it's a fad, you know, it's hot. And I had this kind of serene sense of calm, like, this is not a fad. I think this is a moment in cultural evolution. In a way, we're going back to tribalism. You just have to look at, you know, what happened in Katrina to realize that just below the surface of this perfect facade of a wealthy society is tribalism. So we're all still connected to the tribe. We're all still part of a DNA that when we look at that sunset or look into that fire in the evening, it takes us back to the origins of who we are. And so for me, I'm fascinated with all of that, with the sense of tribalism. And I think tattooing is here to stay, because that human desire to tell the story of who you are and what you do. You know, when we sat in the caves, those early cave paintings are all about the hunt. This is who I am. I'm the great warrior. I killed this. We've been telling the story of what it means to be human since then. This is just an expression of that.
So you live in Telluride now.
Part-time.
You continue to travel out around the world. You were just in the Sahara last week. What brings you back, and what keeps bringing you back to Mountainfilm? Because it's like, for me, it's like a family, and I would imagine it's the same for you. Can you talk about your relationship with this community?
Well, we're talking about, you know, being a part of the tribe, and it's a cliche that we often talk about here at the film festival, but the essence of it is really, I think, you know, one needs to gather around the fireplace and of the tribe and tell the stories. And it's such a beautiful meeting of mountains. So there's this physical aspect of getting out and communing with nature, the soulful spiritual essence of being surrounded by amazing nature, and great intellectual firepower. So there's this moment, this small, fragile moment that once a year we gather from literally the four corners of the planet and just, you know, gather around that fireplace and tell the story.
Mountainfilm is the fire.
And it recalibrates me for 360 days.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Chris.
Very welcome.
Thank you for coming
Pleasure,
back.
honestly.